What's new now that we have the uniform guidance? So, this is the first thing that we hope is new. So previously, there are 8 OMB circulars governing grants. And just to list them all, we have A102, A110, A89, administrative requirements, A87, A21, A122, cost principles. We had A133, audit requirements, and A50, audit resolution. It's a mouthful, right? And so if you're a state agency and you get a grant, say the state of California gets a grant, you have to know A102 administrative requirements and A89, A87 is cost principles, A133 is your audit, and A50 audit resolution. Now let's say you make a subaward to a university. Now you also have to know A110 administrative requirements for universities and nonprofits and A21 cost principles for universities, because how else are you going to know if they're breaking the rules or not? Then you make a subaward to a nonprofit organization, you'll add on A122. So this is how you get this guide, like, there's like 8 circulars. And first of all, if you don't already know where to find them, good luck finding them, because some are on the OMB website, some are in the C.F.R, some are in like a Word document. It is really hard to find them. And beyond that, you have your agency regulations, which may differ. And the guidance itself is very tricky, right? Because you can read it kind of side by side, and a lot of it looks duplicative, like it says the same thing, but then there's like a word that's different, and it's like, oh, does that mean the same thing, or is that actually a difference? It can be really hard to tell. So the guidance is really kind of hard to understand and implement across organizations. So now, all the guidance is streamlined into 2 C.F.R. 200. It's really easy to find there. If you go to the Code of Federal Regulations, and the website is eCFR.gov, you click on Title II, Section 200. It's all right there on one web page. Each section is hyperlinked, so you can very quickly kind of see how it's organized, click on the section you're looking for, go back and forth, and that's it. That's your guidance for all awards. And it's not to say that it's always the same across types of organization. There are some things that remained different, but now it's very clear. It'll say, here's the guidance for all organizations. Here's where it's different for states. Here's where it's different for universities. Here's where it's different for local governments. So it's very clear when there's a discrepancy between types of organizations. And the bonus to all of this is that as federal agencies implemented the uniform guidance, because it's all there in one spot, they could just reference it. So if you go to, for example, the Department of Education, it says we are implementing the guidance at 2 CFR 200, they were able to then eliminate all their language in the CFR and remove entire chapters in the Code of Federal Regulations that were duplicative and overlapping. So after federal agencies implemented this guidance, the total volume of financial management regulations reduced by 75%. So that's pretty good, right? Yeah, got a question?
So have all the federal agencies updated the CFR to,
Yeah.
to do this rather than?
Yep. So if you go to Title II, you go to that website, ecfr.gov, Title II, you'll see Section 200 is OMB guidance. There's a chapter there, I think it's Part 1, that's OMB guidance. And then right below it, Chapter 300, Part 300, I forget which agency comes first. And then you'll see all the agencies listed right underneath, and it's each agency's implementation of the uniform guidance. It's all right there.
Oh, so they don't actually go change like CPGs and 570, have they updated that?
So that's HUD. So HUD has implemented the uniform guidance. So there's the HUD chapter that will say HUD has implemented the uniform guidance. They may have some exceptions or additions, but that's right there. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't still some program regulations that may have their own specific guidance relative to that program. So CDBG is one that may have additional specific regulation. I can't speak to that one in particular. So it's not to say that all regulations are gone, but where they used to have broader sort of financial management regulations across the department as a whole, those have been dramatically consolidated. Yeah.
You might follow up on this question.
Sure.
This is only implementation for new grants, correct? Do you have any outstanding grants prior to December 26th?
Yeah.
Still fall under the previous guidelines?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So that gets to the effective date, which we will talk about, but since you asked, the new guidance is effective as of December 26, 2014. So that means for all new awards made after December 26, 2014, the uniform guidance applies. It also means for agencies that consider a funding increment to be an opportunity to change the terms and conditions of their award, the new guidance applies to those funding increments. Now, different agencies do it differently in terms of whether or not they consider a funding increment to be an opportunity to change the terms and conditions of the award. So you really have to look at the terms and conditions of your awards. Some agencies do it, some agencies don't. That being said, there is also a policy that you can never be penalized once you've gotten one grant with the terms and conditions of the uniform guidance. If an organization wants to make entity-wide changes, so for example, if you're looking at time and effort reporting or procurement standards or your conflict of interest policy or whatever it is, and you want to make an organization-wide change to conform with uniform guidance or to take advantage of some of the flexibility there, you can never be penalized for that. So if you have a federal award from before December 26th, it has old terms and conditions, say it never got a funding increment, those old terms and conditions continue to apply. There's no retroactive changing. However, if you as an organization want to make organization-wide policy changes that conform with the uniform guidance, you won't be penalized for that. So old awards, old terms and conditions, new award, new terms and conditions, up to the organization what changes they make. Another question?
Grantees that have more restricted areas, let's take small purchase procedures,
Mm-hmm.
or procurement, or how we define vendors as contractors, this exercise. Will OMB essentially permit grantees as well as sub-grantees, those that have received sub-awards, to use less restricted or more restricted? In many cases in the city of Los Angeles, even more restricted. Let's take the example, scientific, educational, technical activities, which as far as procurement, is not as well defined as the old circular outdone. So is there, will OMB give the grantees more leeway and just say basically if you're restricted, you're okay, you're on the run?
So it's a good question. It's a question about, and we'll get to the procurement standards in particular and what it says there in the uniform guidance. But your question, I think, is about the layers of government and how OMB guidance works if you have different requirements, different layers of government that filter down. Now, this is the federal government speaking. So the federal government's perspective on this is if it's a federal dollar, the federal guidance applies. So if you get the terms and conditions of your award, it has the uniform guidance attached to it. That's the uniform guidance. Those are the terms and conditions that we're going to be auditing to. So that's, even if it gets passed through from the state, if it's a federal dollar, those terms and conditions from the federal government flow through. Now that being said, if the state has a more prescriptive, or the county or the city has a more prescriptive requirement, you'd still be complying with the uniform guidance if you followed that more prescriptive requirement, if you have, if you have consistent policies across the organization. So we wouldn't have any problem with that. But at the same time, we also don't say, go ahead and ignore the city policies. We say, this is the federal policies. When the federal government comes into audit, we're gonna wanna make sure you're consistent with the terms and conditions of the federal award. But that's where our layer of inquiry ends. Now that being said, this is a great opportunity. We have new uniform guidance here, and we're having these conversations at the state, with the states, with the counties, with the cities right now. So if anyone's thinking about changing their policies, now is a great time to open up that conversation. And again, first year of marriage, so if it's not clear how it works, this is a great time to pick up the phone and say, hey, let's think a little creatively about our procurement standards here. What should the policy be? Because we have this new guidance coming out of OMB, and maybe we could do it more efficiently.
What's exciting is that we're talking about transparency.
Yeah.
And that came out of ERA. That came out of the stimulus act, and that was something that I don't know how contributory that is to where we are going now.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
But I didn't know if the data played a major role in terms of transparency. If you recall, with the stimulus, there was a very cool, beautiful website, and it revealed everything. But the thing that went through my head as an analyst is, since we're providing the data and there isn't any confirmation of the data, we're pushing the stimulus money out so fast. How will we be able, will we have a role to verify the information or have an independent verification of information that will be going into the slot, so to speak, into the data, under the Data Act?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is about the Recovery Act, and compliments to the website. It was very cool, very easy to use. There were questions, because to your point, that data came from all of you. There were questions about data quality, just like there are on usaspending.gov, where a lot of that data is now. What you'll see, actually, the Department of Treasury has been working really closely with OMB to implement the Data Act. You'll see in the next few months, coming very soon, a refresh of the website, hopefully building on some of the lessons learned from recovery in terms of just the user interface and the look and feel of that. There are a lot of conversations going on now, though, about how we kind of navigate that balance of, we know there was a ton of work involved in the Recovery Act and the reporting requirements that came with it. And again, as we implement the Data Act, we want to kind of walk that line of making sure we're best using the information we're already collecting, not duplicating the wheel. Again, doing that in a very standardized way, because that's really, I think, where the information quality can really be supported. And you raise a good point about verifying that information. Federal agencies already have a lot of information that they collect, and a lot of oversight checks in place between the single audit and other sources. So you'll see kind of woven as a theme throughout the uniform guidance, efforts to think about the information that we already use, how we collect it, how we can collect it more uniformly in a more standard way, and leverage that information across the life cycle of the grant, so that the next time someone says, hey, where did it go? You know, like, I can pick it up on my iPhone really quickly, and there will be that, you'll kind of be easier, it'll be easier to navigate those concerns based on the information we collect as a matter of course. So good thoughts, that's the dream. All right, so we're still on what's new under the uniform guidance. So key policy reforms. And this is sort of to give you an overview. What we'll do here is I'll give you some of the key themes of what the policies really tried to reform. And then after we go through the themes, we'll go through the guidance really kind of in order, as, you know, kind of section by section, to give you an idea of what changed. So you don't have to feel like you have to soak it all in now. This is going to be kind of the first view, you know, bucketed by theme, and then you'll see it again kind of bucketed by section. But just to kind of give you an idea of what's coming. So the first one, eliminating conflicting and duplicative guidance. We just talked about that, 75% reduction, and now it's all in one place, into C.F.R, one place to find it, one set of guidance, much more streamlined. The second one, performance over compliance. Again, this is a big theme you'll see woven throughout the guidance, and the idea here is that middle of the solar system, right? We're focused on the outcomes. Are homeless people getting access to housing? Are kids graduating from school? Did we build a highway? Is transportation infrastructure more sound? Are we achieving our outcomes for better places to live, better places to work, better outcomes for people? And so there are a couple policies woven throughout that help us do that. One of them I mentioned earlier is in the exceptions section, 102, 200.102. This is the memo M1317 that I mentioned. It's referenced there. So again, it's just in the exceptions section, sort of an innocuous one, but it does say, hey, OMB and the federal government is willing to consider waivers to any of these requirements for communities that have gotten together with their stakeholders, providing innovative solutions based on evidence. Another one, fixed amount awards. In section 200.201, we talk about what type of award you're making. It gives federal agencies the option of fixed amount awards. These are, traditionally when you get a grant, it's based on cost reimbursement, right? So you submit your costs, you get reimbursed. Fixed amount awards, you get a fixed amount of money, you have a program outcome you have to achieve. Say we're doing 10,000 home visits for pregnant mothers. And if you achieve it for less money, great, you get to keep the difference. And if it costs you more, that's on you. You're still responsible for achieving that outcome. So it puts a little bit more risk on the recipient. You have to be a better, more careful manager of your funds, but at the same time, it can really clear up a lot of those compliance requirements because we're no longer interested in how you spent each and every dollar. We just want to know if you accomplished the goal. So that's a new mechanism for funding. Some agencies have been doing this for a long time, but it puts it in the uniform guidance, it elevates it a little bit. Another one is the performance measurement section, 200.301. We'll talk about that one. Not really a big policy change, but new language there that talks about a focus on outcomes, performance goals, indicators, and really putting the onus on federal agencies not just to have performance reporting requirements for the sake of having them, but really to collect information that allows us to learn about which approaches are working and which aren't, and filter those lessons learned across programs, across agencies, across the government, so that we can think about our approach to these interventions writ large. And the final one is 200.430, compensation for salaries and wages, fondly known as time and effort reporting. There have been some big changes there, really getting rid of a lot of the more detailed prescriptive procedural requirements for how you account for salaries and wages, and instead opening that up to a broad focus on records that accurately reflect the work performed based on strong internal controls, and then broad flexibility for how you do that as an organization. So we'll talk more about that one too. Second theme, efficient use of technology and shared services. Interesting little known fact, maybe well-known fact. Last time a lot of these circulars were updated was the 1980s, early 90s. So things have changed, right? Now we use electronic information. And that has really had implications for our business processes, our business management, and the circulars did not previously account for that. So there's a lot of language kind of woven throughout to kind of move us away from submit your form in the mail to, and more kind of broad business process language. A few things really specifically though. One is how we treat computers and computing devices specifically. Previously, the threshold between equipment and supplies has always been $5,000. Historically, a computer costs a lot more than that. Now, you can buy a computer for a lot less than that. No one really ever said what that meant in terms of how you account for them. So there have been a lot of audit findings of confusion, what's a computer, supply or equipment. So now that's clarified, computers are a supply. Internal controls, you have to have really strong internal controls as an organization, a lot of flexibility in how you do that. That's not a policy change, but it's emphasized in the guidance, and it's really a cornerstone, again, of that risk-based approach. So organizations are required to have strong internal controls, flexibility on how they do that, and then based on those internal controls, you can structure your oversight and your management accordingly. There's also language about protection for personally identifiable information. This is, again, 21st century issue, right? But if you're delivering a benefits program and you're collecting social security numbers, or if you're a university and you're doing sensitive research, you may have data sets that are really sensitive and really valuable. And so, for us, it's not so much a matter of have you inventoried your computers, but have you put the right internal controls and security measured in place over sensitive data and protecting personally identifiable information. So that's kind of a new layer of our internal controls. Another one is our procurement standards, thinking about how we purchase things. There are general standards for procurement that, one, require entities to do their procurements most efficiently, not a earth-shaking set of policies, but really wanting to emphasize that general theme. And so there are a lot of different ways to do that. For example, strategic sourcing agreements, shared services agreements, where you're thinking about how to do procurements across your organization, across layers of government, or across agencies within a government. We want to encourage that to be done as efficiently as possible, so there are flexibilities there to account for that. And again, we also want to encourage open data formats. So again, another 21st century issue there for information technology. Another one is section 200.446 on idle facilities. Used to be you could never allow for idle facilities, but now we know when we're implementing shared service agreements, for example, a lot of times you have fluctuations in workload, and so you need some idle capacity, so that's now allowable. And another one is 200.449 interest. And this is where financing costs come in. Financing for infrastructure has always been allowed, but now we also have allowability for information technology. We know sometimes you have to build software systems, big software systems that power public services, and sometimes there are financing costs associated with those, so those are now allowable. Another big theme, consistent and transparent treatment of, and we have nice little parentheses here, appropriately limited costs. So consistent and transparent treatment is a big one, right? We have matching requirements, which are made a little bit more consistent. Voluntary committed cost sharing can only happen when it's in the notice of funding announcement. We have section 200.331, indirect cost rates for pass-through entities. This is a big one for subrecipients now. Pass-through entities are required to pass through indirect costs to subrecipients. We have new policy 200.413, direct costs. We have this interesting lingua in the grants management space, this idea of administrative costs, right? Which are not actually defined anywhere. There's no definition for administrative costs. You kind of know it when you see it. But really what we care about in grants management is the difference between direct costs, which are directly allocable to the award, and indirect costs, which are difficult to allocate to one award. And typically, administrative costs, if you have a person answering the phone for many different awards, tend to be indirect, but not always, right? Sometimes there could be an administrative person who's 100% dedicated to a particular award, and that's pretty clearly allocable. So the guidance now clarifies that that's okay. That can be direct charge when that person is 100% allocable to the award. It doesn't have to be 100%, just has to be allocable. So that's the standard. We're interested in direct versus indirect. Administrative can be either one. Indirect costs, section 200.414, and we'll come back through all of these so you'll see these again, but 414, making sure the federal government provides a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, making sure that we allow extensions for indirect costs. So if you want to extend your rate for up to 4 years and avoid the burden of negotiating, you can do that. And a de minimis rate of 10% modified total direct costs for entities that have never had an indirect cost rate. So for those where it's been too burdensome to negotiate a rate perhaps, or they just haven't been able to even contemplate a federal award for that reason. Hopefully some of the smaller organizations now will be able to access federal grants and have their indirect costs reimbursed. We do have the appropriately limited here. We had previously, there was an item of cost for morale. Now think to yourself about what might be an appropriate morale cost. Probably just about anything you might want to charge, a company yacht, but that really certainly helps with morale. So that's not allowable anymore, I'm sorry. Morale costs are out. There's new language around conferences. I don't know if any of you have seen the scandals about the $16 muffin or the fortune tellers in the paper. There are no more fortune tellers allowed. Fortune tellers were never allowed. But there is language there that is not earth-shattering or new, just reminding us all that you have to be an efficient steward of federal funds when it comes to planning a conference, and as with everything, those costs have to be reasonable, allocable to the award, necessary for the execution of the award, etc. So nothing earth-shattering, but that new language is there. And then encouraging, setting standard business processes and data definitions. This is one that I've kind of mentioned already, but you'll see this theme kind of woven through the guidance. We have standard definitions in the definition section. So for example, things like period of performance, start date, award date, etc. That's now standardized. Period of performance, that's it. Every time you see it in the guidance, that's what it'll be. And that's setting the stage now for what you will continue to see as OMB further standardizes data elements through forms, through information collections, and ultimately through what's published transparently, for example, on usaspending.gov. So that definition section starts it, and then anytime there's guidance about application requirements, reporting requirements, information collections in general, there's no major policy change, but you'll just see language that sets the stage for those to be more standardized throughout. And then encouraging family-friendly policies. This is an important one. Again, not a major policy change, a few changes, but for example, leave costs have always been allowable, consistent with organization policies. Entities are allowed to provide leave, in parentheses, such as annual sick, ... Now it says annual sick, family leave, ... So not a policy change, but a gentle reminder that maternity leave, paternity leave, any kind of dependent care, family-related leave is allowable if the organization provides it organization-wide. Travel costs and conference costs, you also see this playing in. Conference costs, costs of providing, identifying locally available daycare. So not providing daycare, but if you were to say to your conference attendees, hey, if you have to bring your kids, there's a daycare down the street where you can take them, you know, you'll have to pay, but there it is. Just doing that legwork is allowable. It's not a huge cost, probably it's an hour of phone calls, but it's now allowable. It's that nudge in the right direction. The other one that is kind of a big change is the travel costs. The marginal costs of one-time dependent care costs to travel for work are allowable. So that doesn't mean you can bring your kid and pay for their plane, doesn't mean you can bring your nanny, but it does mean if you are going and say you're a single parent and because you're going now you need to find some overnight childcare for your kid, that cost of overnight childcare is an allowable travel cost that can be charged to the award if it's consistent with the entity's wide policy. So you can't just do it for your federal grants, but if the entity does that policy, you can do it, yeah.
Well, a 2-year-old would trigger whether it be Southwest or American and the other would travel full adult fare. Would the, let's say it's a nonprofit marathon, a single mom, she's flying from San Francisco to Washington. Would she or he or whoever is facing that cost, which can be enormous, would they have to do
So again, the key underpinning this policy, it has to be consistent with the organization's entity-wide policy. So say the city of Los Angeles has a policy for all of its employees, regardless of whether or not their salaries are charged to federal awards, that if they are traveling, their dependent care costs are reimbursed. Then it's up to the city how they want to structure that policy in terms of what documentation they need. Just to kind of clarify though, we're not talking about the airfare for the child or the dependent, older or younger, whoever that dependent may be. We're just saying, say in your example, a single parent is flying to a conference. In that single parent, it's the context for this actually is from the scientific community. And you had the Organization of Women in Science actually articulating that they're seeing a lot of women in science exit the field right around the time they start having kids, because for scientists, it is really important to go to conferences to present their papers and advance their body of research. And you were having young parents saying, look, I can't go. And so the way it's structured is it's basically those marginal costs without which you wouldn't go to the conference, right? So you're responsible for your kids' daycare costs every day. That's not charged to the federal award. And the opportunity comes up to travel, and normally you would say, hey, I'd love to, but someone's got to watch my kid tonight. I've got to be home to pick them up at 6 o'clock, so I can't go. And instead, you say, okay, I have this one-time cost. I need some help, someone to cover overnight childcare. And that marginal cost that would have otherwise prevented the person from attending the conference is now allowable. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an interesting question, because there was recently an announcement about sick leave and comp time and encouraging, making sure entities do provide sick leave or comp time. The uniform guidance doesn't really get into that at all. So organizations kind of are responsible for their own policies about comp time and sick leave, and we really don't get into that level of detail. But it's a good question, because I know that's been a policy that's kind of come up for discussion, so probably one worth thinking about. Oh, okay, yeah, that's probably a California issue then. Okay, so keep moving. We'll come back to this one though, so keep thinking about your questions here. Strengthening oversight. This is one, again, on that spectrum of risk, we want to make sure we're setting that framework in both directions. So just as we're providing those flexibilities, we're providing more tools for oversight too. So, for example, federal agencies are required to have a conflict of interest policy in place that we don't say what it has to be. Federal agencies have their own discretion how to do it, but you'll kind of see that in place. There's been a lot of questions when we talk about conflict of interest. Do we mean scientific conflict of interest? If you're an AIDS researcher, you can't be evaluating proposals for the same thing. No, that is not what this is about. This is about conflict of interest in how you spend the money. So, did you hire your sister to work on the grant and pay her to actually stay home every day? That would be a conflict of interest. Did you award a contract to your brother-in-law's company that's actually bankrupt and not doing anything? That would be a conflict of interest. So those types of conflicts, federal agencies have to have a policy, non-federal entities are required to disclose. Mandatory disclosures also for violations of law. There's been a violation of law, non-federal entities are required to disclose. Merit and risk, we'll talk about this more, but requirements for federal agencies to do pre-award reviews of the merit of an application and the risk associated with an applicant. Again, this sets the stage for oversight throughout the process of the award. So we think about risk up front, we structure the award appropriately, and this requirement carries through for pass-through entities too. When pass-through entities are determining how to make an award, they need to think about the risk as well. And then we have our internal controls section. Again, not a policy change, but requiring strong internal controls. And finally, targeting waste, fraud, and abuse. Again, this gets down to, okay, now we've kind of structured our grants management policies throughout the pre-award, the grants management throughout the life cycle based on risk. How do we take this kind of blanket audit compliance requirement and make it just a little more nimble to focus on risk? So raising the threshold from $500,000 to $750,000, structuring the major program determination, looking at what gets audited more carefully, making our single audit reports public online. It's always been public information, but now it will actually be published online, searchable, so that anyone can find them, and eliminating that paper submission, paper chase that happens usually as a result, and requiring agencies to make better use of audits. So establishing a senior accountable official and a management liaison to work across agencies for more seamless audit resolution, encouraging non-federal entities and federal agencies to work together for cooperative audit resolution. So instead of just issuing management decision letters in kind of a check-the-box fashion, actually trying to resolve those internal control weaknesses so that you don't see repeat findings happening year after year.